Radio Mano Papachango.
Hey Chris, my name is Maria, and I'm tuning in currently from my lab in Massachusetts. I'm an undergrad over here, originally from Ukraine, and I guess I'm representing a minority, as you like to say, of your audience, young female. And I'm currently listening to a podcast as I'm processing some of the data we just collected earlier today on movement and synchrony in humans, and we're looking at the connection between deep muscles and the surface muscles, as well as looking at our body as a whole and trying to see how small tweaks in one part of our body affect our movement overall. And I don't know, I guess your podcast and your approach to thinking really inspired me to start this research in the first place, because I managed to find a great mentor who shares a lot of my beliefs as well as supports me intellectually. And together we're trying to deconstruct how we can get back, essentially how we can get back to moving freely and efficiently, like we did back in our hunter-gatherer days. And it's very inspiring to hear how different guests you invite to the podcast sort of do the same thing, but in their own pockets of nature and science. So I really appreciate your podcast, and it keeps me company when I'm processing my data, when I'm going for walks, and I share it with as many people as I can when I get a chance. So thanks to you, and thanks to your audience for tuning in and talking on Reddit.
Thank you so much, Maria. So cool to know you're out there analyzing data, listening to the podcast. It always blows my mind to get a taste for all the different things that people are doing while they're listening to this. I am sitting in a hammock, one of my favorite hammocks. It's like a tie-dye thing. It's an ENO, Eagle's Nest hammock. It's the double-sized. It's awesome. I travel with it. I've got it up here in Kopayam on this terrace I'm sitting on, overlooking the jungle, about 20 steps away from the beach. There's nobody here. It's a very weird situation, best of times, worst of times kind of thing, where as a traveler, it's really awesome to be in Thailand right now because there are almost no tourists. But for the Thai people who live on tourism, it's tough times. So, yeah, strange, this sort of double-edged sword situation that seems to be everywhere in our world. Speaking of data, research, and so on, this episode is brought to you by OMG Yes. I mentioned them on a previous episode. They're sponsoring 2 episodes a month for the next few months, so you'll hear me talk about them a bit. It's a website that is awesome. It's devoted to women's sexual pleasure at this point. They're going to be introducing episodes about men's sexual pleasure in upcoming iterations, but at the moment, omgyes.com is a website devoted to women's sexual pleasure. And they've done a lot of analyzing of data themselves in partnership with Indiana University and the Kinsey Institute. The researchers have asked tens of thousands of women, what was the one discovery you've made that really made your pleasure better? Then they found patterns in these discoveries. They organized it all into a tasteful, remarkably open and honest website, omgyes.com. I really encourage you to check it out. It's fascinating. It's the way sexuality should be treated. It's a place to learn a lot. It's awesome. It's tasteful. It's not porny. It's just cool. It's intelligent. And I really like it. I wouldn't recommend it to you if I didn't. omgyes.com and / Chris Ryan, and you get 10% off. It's a one-time purchase. It's not a subscription thing. So once you purchase access, you've got access forever and ever. This episode is with my buddy Timo, Timoteo, also known as Tim. Tim is an awesome guy. He's a really interesting cat. He's a former Mormon. He was raised as a Mormon. He left the Mormon church for a lot of reasons, but a big part of it was their sort of antiquated take on sexuality. Tim's got some interesting sexual energy, or I don't know, sexual energy is probably the wrong way to put it, but he's got two brothers who are gay. When Tim saw the way they were treated in the church, he decided that he'd had enough. And he became a political consultant in Seattle who helped lead the reform of marijuana laws in Washington. Quite interesting. He worked later for a place called, or he actually founded a business, Crisis Communications, that was hired to represent the nursing home where the first COVID death in America happened. You probably remember this. Just outside of Seattle, there was a nursing home where COVID spread, and this is very early days, and they were blamed. The government basically said, oh, it's because this nursing home isn't instituting the best practices, and they're not doing what they should be doing, and that's why people are getting it. It has nothing to do with this virus being incredibly contagious and about to spread all over the world. No, this is just a bad nursing home. And then the same thing happened with cruise ships. And Tim was at the heart of that. Tim was the face of the company who's talking to TV reporters and 60 Minutes and all this kind of stuff. So he did that for a while. Talk about a pressure cooker job. And then he quit that, and he's been on a motorcycle trip since 2017. So I guess he sort of flew back to deal with this shitstorm. But he left in early 2017 on a motorcycle, intending to stop for a month in different places on the way to Tierra del Fuego at the southern tip of South America. He spent a year going through Mexico, stopping in various places, and then he stopped in Antigua, Guatemala, and stumbled upon this beautiful courtyard garden situation there, and ended up talking to the owner and renting it long term and setting up an Airbnb, and he's been living there ever since, about 4 years. So I was in Guatemala, and I posted something on Instagram, and Tim was like, hey dude, you're in Guatemala, I live here now. And I had no idea. I hadn't been in touch with him for a while. I knew he was on the motorcycle trip, but I didn't know he had settled for a bit. And so it was really great. It was the high point of our time in Guatemala. We ended up hanging out with Tim and renewing and deepening our friendship with him. And yeah, he's a special guy. In fact, he's on his way to Thailand, so he'll be here in a week or so, I hope, barring global collapse, which is always an addendum you add to anything these days, strangely. But anyway, we talk about all those experiences and some work that Tim's been doing. He's very interested in the creation of community and trying to give a lot of serious thought to how we're going to move forward through the crises that we're facing, and how we can design resilient communities based on justice and respect and mutual cooperation. And so he's been looking a lot at questions of tribalism and group identity, and sort of how to intentionally design a social system, if that makes sense. So I guess you can say he's an aspiring cult founder or something. Anyway, Timoteo. Tim, interesting cat. I'm going to play you out with one of my all-time favorite songs. It's sung by Eddie Vedder. It's from the soundtrack to Into the Wild. Seemed apropos to this episode. It's called Society. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am here in the living room of my friend Timo. Why is it Timo? Is there just no Tim in Spanish?
I have found that the little Mayan girls, and I have a few that I take care of, and they struggle saying Tim, and Timo's easier for them. So, because I would say Timoteo, and they say Timo.
Yeah.
As a,
Oh, okay. So it's short for Timoteo,
yeah,
I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have a funny history. I met Tim in Seattle, and we're still not sure how. It had something to do with a blog about a man bag, we think. But anyway, we became friends 10 years ago.
Probably 10
8,
years.
9, something, pushing 10. And we've been in touch sporadically since then. And last thing I remember was you said something about you were cruising around on a motorcycle and camping. Was that this summer?
It was during COVID.
Right.
While I was trapped, I couldn't get back to Guatemala. So I bought the bike and did a loop and a half about around the U.S.
And that was this past summer?
Summer.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So I was out in the van.
No, it was a year ago.
So it was the previous summer.
2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
In any case, I was out in the van, and I remember saying, yeah, let's get together. We're in wherever the fuck we were. And then I think we didn't hear from you, and you ended up cruising through Mexico on your motorcycle.
Yeah.
And anyway, sort of lost touch. And then I got to Guatemala 6 weeks ago and posted something from Lake Atitlan, and Tim reached out and said, hey, what the fuck, you're in Guatemala, I live here. And I was like, what, you live here? And it turned out we had stayed in a hotel like 2 doors from here for a few days, but didn't know you were here and didn't run into you. But anyway, we've been hanging out ever since. So it's one of those serendipitous re-encounters on the road.
Yeah, it's been a nice month.
It's been a
lot
month.
of fun.
Yeah. So Tim and I recorded a podcast early on, episode, what was it, 34, 5, 6, somewhere in there. Yeah, I looked it up recently, but I forget exactly. But if you want to hear our first episode, go back in the archives to episode, just look for Tim.
It'll be, I need to go back and listen to it too, because I actually feel like I'm a really different person now.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to do this. It's been 10 years or whatever, and you look the same, but you've been through a lot. A lot of shit's gone down.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. What are some of the most salient changes in your life over the last decade?
I think after you left, I got even deeper into Seattle politics and ended up working for a couple years for one of the mayors up there as the council liaison. And just the process of all the changes Seattle was going through and working in politics for 20 years, it sort of burnt me out on the city. And
previously you had been involved in the marijuana legalization movement,
strip clubs,
politically. Exactly.
Yeah.
You were taking on some interesting, very progressive
I sort of became
causes.
known as the consultant who would run the difficult political campaigns, including some candidates that were difficult. And and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I then started to do, the last couple of years I was in Seattle, I founded a firm with 2 others doing crisis communications. And that is mostly remote work, and that's what allowed me to step out of being in Seattle full time. So I left the very first of January 2017 with the plan of living in a new city every month for a year, every month until I got to the southern tip of Argentina. And I did that for a year in Mexico, landed in Antigua with in fact, you gave me my whole list of things to do in Antigua. I said I was going, and you had a friend write me a whole list of recommendations. And
wonder who that was.
But then I landed in this garden, actually, and so fell in love with it that changed all my plans, and I've been here for just over 4 years.
Right. So, little shout out to people who might want to come to Antigua. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's awesome cobblestone streets, so the cars go very slowly. It kind of feels like almost a pedestrian kind of small city. Beautiful ruins all over the place of Spanish churches, convents and monasteries, because this was the capital of Central America under the Spanish. And the town kept getting destroyed by earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and then they'd build it up again. So you've got these layers of history here. Yeah. And Tim's got an Airbnb thing here. What's the website?
If you go to antiguabnb.com,
right,
it will take you straight to all my units.
Yeah, and they're all sort of around the largest courtyard in Antigua, so it's very spacious and beautiful. I mean, we're not doing this as an advertisement, but if someone's listening to this and they want to be like, I'm going to Antigua, I want to meet that dude. It sounds great. Yeah. So anyway, the other thing like we should mention, because I think it informs a lot of what you do in life, and we talked about it a lot in the first episode. We don't need to talk about it now, if whatever. But you grew up as a Mormon. Correct. So it's funny that you would be leading the charge politically to liberate or liberalize the strip club laws in Seattle and marijuana and all that. And part, I mean, obviously you're very smart and adept and you got all the context, but also part of it is you just look so unbohemian, because you've got that trustworthy Mormon visage that probably plays to your advantage in those political conversations.
And to be honest, that makes people laugh a bit, but I ran those campaigns in Seattle for marijuana, and I don't particularly enjoy marijuana, but for me it was a first salvo in taking down the war on drugs, and I continued doing work in that direction. But it helped that I wasn't a pothead, so to speak. Right. In fact, we sort of had to keep a distance from that to be able to win that campaign in Washington, and so I played my part.
Right. You keep strip clubs at an arm's length as well?
Yeah, that was a fun campaign, actually. Seattle had tried to outlaw the 3 remaining strip clubs that existed in Seattle. The city council had passed a law, and just taking the temperature of the city, it felt like everybody thought, what the fuck? Why are you, we're a major metropolitan area. Right. So I ran a referendum and got the 3 strip clubs to contribute to a campaign, and we won by like 65% and repealed the city council's laws. But
just to protect those 3 or to open it up to competition?
Well, it's still, so they've really locked zoning down. Zoning becomes the tool by which they outlaw strip clubs, and zoning hasn't really eased up much since then, so I don't think there's been any influx of new clubs. It's still on the periphery of Seattle. There's some in little towns that have less restrictions, but people think of Seattle as this highly liberal place. Yeah. But there's a weird political dynamic there, because there's certain ways in which it could be very conservative too. So
is that historical, or is that coming out of all the big money that's come up there in the last couple of decades? All the Microsoft money, the Boeing money?
There's that, but I'm not sure that those took it more conservative. I think there's sort of this Nordic heritage. A lot of Nordic immigrants early on set a certain tone of what's right and proper.
But wasn't Seattle like a wild gateway to the Yukon?
Sure, there was that part of it too.
I remember reading there was some woman who was a very important part of Seattle history who had a brothel.
Gypsy Lee Rose.
Yeah. And she was she mayor or something? That she rose to.
No, she wasn't mayor, but they had a female mayor, like early in the 1900s, and.
But that woman I'm thinking of, I don't remember the story, but I remember she ran a brothel and they tried to, outlaw and she instead got into politics and took power and outmaneuvered everybody and ended up being this kind of like really important figure in the history of Seattle. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a couple movies about her. Maybe I'll have to go back and see them. So.
Yeah. Anyway, so you were doing that, then you started this crisis communications. I asked you about this the other day. I remember maybe we were watching football or something, and I said, so what, you you told people how to spin bad news, and you had an interesting response to that.
Yeah, everybody thinks that's what we do. In fact, our clients always think that we're coming in to help them spin. And because human nature is the way it is, everybody wants to deflect blame. That's the first human response that everybody goes through. And our job, what we really see our job, is holding their hand while they tell the truth. And we often tell those clients that the public will forgive a fuck up, but they won't forgive a cover up. You know, so if you come to people,
because that shows intent.
Yeah, exactly.
And, premeditation.
And people understand that things happen, right? And if you come to people open and honest, it resonates with people. And so we spend most of our time helping them tell the truth in the best way possible, but always telling the truth. We never want our clients to be surprised by anything else that comes out. We want them to be seen as the leading authority on whatever, you know, and maybe we can discuss what I did last year. So the last day of February 2020, I got a phone call sitting here in this room in Antigua, Guatemala, and it was the nursing home just outside of Seattle where the very first COVID death occurred. And it became immediately apparent that they had no capability of managing global news. They had about 40 satellite trucks outside of their facility in those first weeks. So I got on a plane within, I think, 6 to 8 hours of that phone call, went to Seattle, and ended up being the face of that company for 8 months. They have 208 nursing homes across the nation, and being part of the very first one threw me right in the center of discussions with the Trump administration and all the major media. And it really gave me what I think is a pretty unique perspective on the way things were actually happening in that whole crisis. But that was fascinating.
So what did you learn? What did you see?
Well, I often tell... So do you know how we grow up watching these pandemic movies, and the first thing you see are all the vans swoop in and the men in suits come out and the government takes control and takes over? It was exactly the opposite. No government agency, including our local government agencies, wanted anything to do with that facility. Nobody came to help. Everybody wanted to blame us, from the King County executive to the governor of Washington.
Blame you for what? Like bad patient management?
Yeah, it was our fault that this had spread in our facility.
It's not funny.
It's really funny. And then, but even the media, I think, well, I'll say this and then I'll tell you what I think should have happened. But the media became complicit in the government spin.
Right.
So every story you saw for months and months, if there was a story about a nursing home, ours was mentioned in that story. And it was always mentioned. So within 2 days of that happening, we lost 37 people died in 2 weeks. Within the first 2 days, what's called CMS, that oversees the regulation of nursing homes across the country, they were in there not to help, not to bring more doctors and nurses, not to provide more PPE, but to look for ways in which we might have failed our patients. So we calculated something like 600 man hours managing them in that first week of the crisis. And so they came out and immediately they fined us $611,000. It was a big story, blah, 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 blah. But that became the media spin from then on. So, for example, the New York Times, I remember this, I had this argument with the New York Times reporter. The first thing, and all the reporters would say, so what did you do wrong? And they were convinced that we had fucked this up.
Right.
It became our fault.
Right.
So we had that $611,000 fine, and we appealed it. And some 8-9 months later, we won that appeal. Everything got thrown out.
Sure, because by then
everyone understood it.
It wasn't your fault.
Right.
It was spreading everywhere.
But the point is, I couldn't get a single news outlet to run that story that we had been exonerated.
You won the appeal.
I mean, I went back to the New York Times. I went back to the Washington Post. Was terrible, and they were taking Trump's side, essentially, because Trump had spun it to blame the nursing homes, because it's not our fault, those nursing homes, right? And people look at a big chain of nursing homes, which we were, but, they're not really equipped. But anyway, we could go on and on about this. It was just an interesting time. And for our little firm, for that first 3 days, 3 weeks, we were managing all the nursing homes and all the crisis for nursing homes and the cruise lines. Like, we had both accounts. So we were right in the center of it.
Are you guys, is your firm different? I mean, the approach you just outlined, that, that you're holding someone's hand while they tell the truth, and is that an unusual approach to crisis management?
Well, there are not a lot of firms that specifically focus on it. A lot of PR agencies might have a person or two that do it. And some legal teams will do it inside of company as well, and that's actually horrible. Like, our biggest fight is always with internal legal teams who never want us to say anything. Right,
because they're trying to cover their ass and avoid liability.
Right. So I don't know that we're different. There's just not a lot of us out there.
What's the name of the firm, by the way?
Sound Counsel Crisis Communications.
Sound Counsel Crisis.
It's soundcounselcrisis.com. So it's fascinating work. This week I had a rapper once, Wale, I think is his name. We got a phone call from a restaurant, and Wale was an up and coming rapper at the time, and I think he had maybe 3 million Instagram or Twitter followers, and after he tweets out, this restaurant is racist. They blah blah blah. They did X, Y, and Z, and they're racist and don't go. And this restaurant calls us, and we go in, and they could not figure out, like, they had no memory of who he was or when he might have been in there or anything. But he's tweeting this to his followers. They're getting death threats. They're getting people. The police had to come post squad car out. And about 3 days later, we back channeled with Wally. Turns out he named the wrong restaurant. He got it completely wrong. So
how'd you handle that?
So we put out the release, and we talked to the local media. But again, it's one of those things that after the fact, the media is never really keen to clean up the story at the end. So if anyone's interested in this, I spent 9 months working with 60 Minutes, who started talking to me in that first week and didn't run a story on us for 9 more months. And it's, to me, the best summation of everything that happened. Because they took their time. They're one of the few news outlets still that take their time. And I gotta say, it's a conservative company I was doing work for, and they were terrified of what 60 Minutes might do to them, because they're gun shy at this point. And it turned out to be one of the better stories on, I think, not just for us, but telling what really happened. So we'll close this by me saying this. If I had been president, having seen what I've seen, here's what I would have done. I would have created a protective bubble around all the nursing homes in the country. I would have given, we furloughed nurses and doctors. I would have sent them all to the nursing homes. We would have isolated those nursing homes. And by doing that, I think you could have more easily managed the whole process. But by leaving it wide open, by making nursing homes feel shame and fear that they're going to be fined and punished for having COVID, right? Anyway, that's enough of that. But at some point, we could transition into how that also plays into my later project and the way that we're warehousing our elderly now. Right. Of course, this is, if there's a virus or a pandemic, because we warehouse our elderly, it's going to spread like wildfire through those facilities, right? And it speaks to the disintegration of community.
Right. And you see that in so many different places, right? I mean, that manifests in monocrop agriculture.
Sure.
Right?
Diversity.
Right. Diversity is strength. Right. And I remember reading a book called One River a long time ago about Richard Evans Schultes. It's written by Wade Davis. It's a great book. But one of the things that he points out in that book is that all the rubber plantations in the world are one cloned rubber plant. And that natural rubber is essential. It's in airplane tires because it won't burst on the high friction when they land. Yeah. They can't use artificial rubber. And it's also in the insulation in a lot of wiring, like important wiring, right? So if we lose that rubber, we're in big trouble. Like the whole
no more airline industry,
no more electronics. Like the whole thing goes down, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a big problem. But it's all one plant.
Yeah.
One plant everywhere, Malaysia, wherever the thing is.
Disease hits that specific
one
strain.
fungal thing, and whoop, it's over. It's so stupid.
Yeah.
The way we sort of, cultivate our vulnerability. It's really weird. Put a bunch of kids together in school, all this, little kids together, and of course, everyone's sick. They're all sick. Of course they are. They're all together. They're all at the same immunocompromised age.
Right.
Yeah. But I wanted to say, before we leave that experience you had, it's just so interesting to see how almost like on a national level and institutional level between the government and the management of the nursing homes and all that, these very human responses play out. Like you started by saying the first response any human has is denial,
right.
And it wasn't my fault, I didn't do it,
right.
No, mommy, it wasn't me, like that goes so back into our consciousness. And then to watch it play out nationally, right? Trump saying, "Hey, it's not my problem. I don't know. It's not. States have to deal with that, or someone else, or it's the China. It's the China syndrome, and all this. It's just all this deflection and blame. It's like you don't know if it's a 7-year-old or it's a government.
And part of what happened, even on the local level, the county and the state, they have so cut the public health budget over the last few decades that, to be honest, they simply didn't have a way to respond to the pandemic.
So those vans with the guys in hazmat
those don't
suits,
exist
they don't
anymore.
Exist. Yeah,
and so
it's only in movies.
So of course they're going to deflect at that point because they've got nothing else to do.
Right.
So, they were saying that this corporation should have been able, they're big enough that they should have been able to deal with this. The CDC didn't even give us guidelines until a week after that happened.
Right.
So, and then those guidelines kept changing. But the government and in an interesting way, they're one of the first clients who I ended up having to legitimately defend as not being culpable for COVID.
Right.
So they're ones in which we weren't trying to spin it per se, but we were just underwater with, and I've sort of learned too that I think there's a latent. What's the word? We feel bad about nursing homes. And if you put your parent in a nursing home, instead of feeling bad that you put your parent in a nursing home, you're going to blame the nursing home. It's always the nursing home fucking up.
How could you treat my father this way?
Right, exactly.
Not how could I send my father off to a nursing home. Yeah.
We had families coming and yelling at us, because it's brand new. Everyone's yelling at us all the time. You can go out on the web actually and see all my daily press conferences that I did and with families and
watch Tim Age on YouTube.
But we would always say to them, look, you are free at any point to take your parent home.
Right.
We're not locking them in here. You could take care of them. And nobody wanted to do that.
Sure.
And I'm even talking about those people inside the facility who hadn't yet gotten COVID.
Yeah.
Right. We had isolated them. And we were having to deal with families who are angry at us, and we're saying, if you don't think they're safe here, take them home. And we would have appreciated that, but families didn't want to.
There's a thing in Spain, I remember when I was working with a lot of Spanish doctors, and they said that, everyone in Spain takes August off, right? That's a national holiday, and the whole country sort of shuts down. It's the same all over Europe. But the hospitals in Spain get packed in August because lots of families who have a senior living with them will say, okay, Grandpa, you're not feeling well.
It's an easy way to put them. They go to the hospital
resort. Go to the hospital for a month while we go to Sardinia, Yeah. It's an interesting situation. Yeah, I don't know. What did that... what am I trying to say? I imagine that being so high stress a situation that you would have had to develop new defense mechanisms to keep your shit together.
Well, to be honest, this is why I do this job. I'm sure there's a part of your career where you feel like you're right in your group, you're right in the lane of what you do, and this was like being in the Super Bowl of what I do for a career,
right?
And what animates me is sometimes I forget that I've been doing, and I sort of took this skill set out of my work in politics. Politics is crisis 24/7, but I feel a real joy when I'm able to bring a skill set that I have to bear on a situation where it's needed.
Right.
And
so what is your skill set that you bring? What's unique about your approach to this?
It's funny. I think if we go back in my history, I think this starts from, as a Mormon, I didn't grow up in Utah. I didn't grow up in the center of Mormonism. There were 10 kids in my high school of 1,200 kids that were Mormon. And I was certainly made to feel as an outsider. And especially in my little town of Issaquah, Washington, was the publishing center for the most prolific anti-Mormon author. And he would make movies and write these books, and then he would go tour all the churches in the area, because most of the attack was from Protestant Christians, right? And he would show these movies to all my friends, and their pastors would talk about how evil Mormons are, and I'm 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade having to be an apologist for my religion, being called a devil worshiper on the playground. I had kids in my neighborhood who were forbidden to play with me.
Right.
And I think at an early age, that, like, having to remain calm as someone's calling you a devil worshiper, and you're, and that's when you're one of 10 kids in a school, and
right.
I had to grow some thick skin.
You want to de-escalate.
Yeah.
And
I think that was early training for my political work, and then political work just took me, and again, because I was doing unpopular issues, I just have developed a way to stay calm in a situation, to recognize, to sort of think ahead. Anyway, it's hard, and I was about to say, sometimes I forget how much experience I have in this, and I think, well, this should be easy. Everyone should be able to do this. There's moments when, and that COVID was a moment which I knew they just didn't have the skill set to do it.
Right.
There'll be listeners here, I'm sure. It became really popular to demonize the nursing homes, and there'll be listeners here who think still that those dirty nursing homes, and who don't pay their nurses enough, and blah 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 blah. But for me, it was like strip clubs. They're an unpopular client that I had to come in and help. And but there's also, there's always deeper stories to some of the, do nurses not make enough taking care of our elderly? Yeah, but it's not because families are overpaying the nursing homes and the nursing homes don't want to pay their nurses. It's because we just don't invest a lot of money in elder care,
right.
From the government investing money in it, and from families themselves investing money in it. Again, it's just it's a weird industry, because as much as I gained from working it, I kind of think it's a national shame, the degree to which we warehouse the elderly like that.
I have a friend, Richard Schweid, who recently published a book called The Caring Class, about home health care workers and nursing home workers. And, he's coming at it obviously from a different perspective, but he has exactly the same conclusion, that it's a national shame that we've allowed this, like so much else, to become a business decision,
right,
rather than a national identity decision. Like, we are a country who takes care of our
right.
elders. We're a country who takes care of our children. We're a country who takes care of our veterans. I mean, the fact that the first responders to 9/11 are still fighting Congress to try to get
sure.
them to cover healthcare costs that obviously came from them rushing in to save lives, is just like, it's absurd. And you and I are both old enough to have learned that lesson over and over again, but it really kills me when I talk to some young person who's like, I joined the Army after 9/11 because I wanted to go and, defend the country and defend freedom. And then, and then they abandoned me when I got back. You know, like, dude, they were doing that in Vietnam. They were doing that in Korea. They were doing that in World War I. There was a march on the White House of World War I veterans demanding the money that had been promised to them when they went over and fucking lost their legs and shit. It's just pathetic.
And we'll get into it, but this sort of the point of Sebastian Junger's book Tribe, right?
Right.
Is how that plays out.
Right. So how is that playing out in your life? I mean, you talked about being isolated by being a Mormon kid in a place where there weren't a lot of Mormons and being demonized by this guy going around, and sort of developing a bit of a shell and a bit of a private world to keep yourself safe.
Well, it's sort of a weird dynamic. Even though there were only 10 kids, there's something about Mormon kids who... We got so much... So Mormonism is not run by a pastor, right? It's lay run. So when you're a Mormon, you're teaching classes and you're giving this talks and speeches on Sundays,
right.
and it's a very hands-on. It teaches you a lot, and there's a thing. By the time those 10 of us got up to high school, one of them was our senior class president. I was athletically active, and so being a part of a group, even though we felt attacked, we were still a part of a group, and you almost, every group does this, you almost feel emboldened by the attacks that come to you. And within our group, in certain ways, that actually, it taught me to realize that I'm not normal, I'm on the outside, and then to build a life independent of that. But also, you really learn to lean on your group, your tribe. And in my experience, that's... in fact, I would say, and we'll talk more, but because tribalism has become a big issue for me, religion is really the last bastion of tribalism that we practice, that anybody's encouraged in any way to join, it seems to me, in Western culture. It's sort of a holdout, even though, as you know, I left the church at 26 and no longer practice and have my own problems with it. But that experience, I think, has informed a lot of where I'm at now.
Right. I was interviewing Blake.
Right.
We're chatting. I haven't released that episode yet, but another former Mormon. And he talked about how even though he's no longer in the church and doesn't believe the teachings of the church, being raised within it, any church, kind of forms the architecture of your mind in a way.
Sure.
So it's like the design of the house. You can change the furniture. You can, say, no, this bedroom's an office now, but you can't really knock down the walls and move the windows. It's the way it is.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way? Is there like a...
Yeah, but I've also...
lasting qualities?
And we've had some conversations around this. I've also attributed a lot of that even to pre-Mormonism, to Junger's archetypes and mythologies that we carry within our, and I think religion... Jung. I'm sorry.
No, Junger. he's the tribe.
Sebastian Junger.
Sebastian Jung.
Carl Jung.
Carl Gustav Junger. Yeah.
And so, but yeah, certainly. I mean, it very much informed who I am and made me, for example, again, I served a Mormon mission for 2 years in which for 12 hours a day I'm knocking on doors and being spat on and rocks thrown at me and called all sorts of names, but had to keep going and knocking on those doors and again feeling like the outsider. But I always tell people one of the greatest things I took from Mormonism is that I learned to speak Spanish. I served in Puerto Rico, and right. So there's things like that. Think about I think a lot about the impact that had on me as a horny 19 to 21 year old who was taken out of that world for 2 years, and just the experience of learning to sort of control my libido, right? How many kids at 18, 19, 20 years ever even have an experience like that? And there's things about that I take away that I think I gained some positive aspects in my life, even though I no longer agree with the philosophy of Mormonism.
Yeah, sending a horny 19-year-old dude to Puerto Rico, of all places. I mean, I had my first girlfriend was Puerto Rican. And
I'm telling you, there were some moments. There are some moments.
He's like, I'm going to go work for strip clubs.
But, what's interesting, and not to get... Oh, we're going to get personal, so... What's interesting is... I was a red-blooded kid. And
you were an athlete.
And I dated all non-Mormon girls before I,
right.
This speaks to the power of religious belief, I think. In those 2 years, I masturbated once.
In Puerto Rico.
In the 2 years I was a missionary. Because of the power of the influence of whatever, the teachings and the whole structure of it.
So you were having wet dreams pretty regularly?
Sure, absolutely.
Those are amazing, huh?
Yeah. You got to learn to appreciate them.
I mean, I don't know how many people want to hear our masturbatory history, but I didn't figure out how to masturbate till pretty late in the game, and so I was having wet dreams for, 6 months or something. And I still remember them as probably the most intense sexual experiences of my life. Just being asleep while it happens, it's like your brain is free to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And there's zero inhibition. You're just, by definition, you're in a flow state,
right,
so to speak. Yeah, it was pretty. Those were the days. But it's a big sacrifice. You gotta
It is.
You gotta.
But sometimes I wonder if, and I would never want my children to be Mormon and serve a Mormon mission again. But sometimes I wonder, that experience of day to day, 12 hours a day for 2 years, knocking on doors and learning languages and interacting, being on your own in communities in which there's nobody else around, and I mean that's a lot of experience, discipline, self-confidence. Things that it gave me that I don't think my children have gotten from anything.
So when you then, years later, when you left the church, did that undercut the value of any of those lessons that you had learned, that self-reliance, that all that kind of stuff?
Well, it's funny. I think I took all the good without recognizing that it had given me this good, and without attributing it back to the church.
Right.
And in fact, I think this is a larger issue. I became a hardcore leftist liberal atheist in Seattle for, decades, and all the attendant beliefs that come with being that. And at the point I'm at now, I do think we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater in certain ways in our rejection of religion, because some of these things predate religion. In fact, that's why I get back to tribalism. So for me, and I guess I'll say this now, I'm working on a project now in which I believe we should return to living in committed community of about the size of 150 people, and but prior to the separation of religion and politics, those things just resided as one within your small group. It was the belief system and the cultural practices that help sustain your group, and there was no separation of those things. And so I think some of those things even predate religion, but when they came into religion and when we rejected religion, we threw out ideas such as holding something sacred.
Right.
Things like ritualistic practices of your values, right? Things that I still think could be valuable if we learned how to use them, because I think they're agnostic to the philosophy that uses them.
Right, I agree. I keep thinking, you've mentioned Sebastian Junger earlier. I keep thinking about how he locates the expression of those things within a military squad, right?
Right.
So you can say, okay, this war was stupid, it was unjust, a lot of people died for nothing, we destroyed the infrastructure of this country for no fucking good reason, but I still love those dudes.
Right.
They saved my ass, and I saved theirs, and there's something eternally valuable about that experience, or the discipline of learning to do whatever it was, learning the language, and learning to survive in the mountains, and learning to fly that helicopter, and yes, the end goal or the structure within which that experience happened was corrupt and ridiculous, but that doesn't invalidate the experience,
right,
or the knowledge that was gained,
right. And again, exactly. So it could be in a military setting, or a religious setting, or a sports team, or anything in which you're committed to certain principles that you work together on. I think is going to produce. It's getting back to Jung's archetype. I think this is natural to the human.
No, I agree, and it's unavoidable. So. Yes, if we shut down the religion and we say, oh, religion's all bullshit, no religion, that stuff doesn't go away. That yearning for belonging doesn't go away. It expresses itself in destructive, chaotic ways. You join the Crips or the Bloods.
Sure.
Or you're like, some vehemence of aligning yourself with some online identity group or something.
Absolutely. I think our anger politics is an outgrowth of that.
Right.
But more than anything, I've come to believe that we're just completely missing out on the power we could be generating in our own lives, to our own lives' ends, not globally,
right.
But the power that exists when you align yourself in a group. And the problem I think we have, and hence my project, is I just don't think we don't have those models anymore. People don't know how to form those groups. And as I've done the research, there are very specific things that build trust in a group that we could bring back in certain ways to let groups do that in our radically individualist world. And that's part of the problem, is that all of our forms of community were built pre-Enlightenment.
Right.
Before the individuals was vaulted to the forefront. And so we don't really know how to do individualism the way we do it now, and community.
Right.
In fact, it's funny we keep bringing up religion, but I've come to recognize when people say, and I used to say it, I'm spiritual, not religious. What it finally hit me, you're saying when you say I'm spiritual, not religious, is you're saying I practice my spiritual values as an individual. Because religion is the way you come together in a group to practice those spiritual values. And because we're so, allergic to that now, we say I'm spiritual, not religious, thereby guaranteeing almost that we can never practice our spiritual values or beliefs or really share them amongst ourselves. It becomes a very personal thing in our individualist world.
I sometimes wonder if the hidden agenda isn't that and this is a half-baked thought here, but I'm thinking about the sort of institutionalized resistance to and the corrosion of these groups, of these sort of collective identities. If that doesn't play to the advantage of the corporate capitalist system that, for example, doesn't want multi-generational households because it's better to split people up, they'll buy more shit. And I'm not saying that the fucking Rothschilds are sitting around coming up with a plot. It just systems maximize conditions that feed back into the system in a beneficial way, right?
Yeah.
So it makes more sense in a post-apocalyptic capitalist world that we live in that people are fragmented.
Sure.
People live alone. People think alone. People see others as the enemy, not as a source of solace or cooperation. Like I always reference this fucking commercial, Like a Good Neighbor, State Farm is there, right? That
always cracks me up.
Yeah, like I want the neighbor. I don't want to pay you fucking company that'll probably not come through. I want the neighbor, but we make everything. We drain everything out of society that isn't monetizable.
See, I'm writing a book right now that outlines my project, and I just finished writing this whole section in which I said I'm a microcosm of the Enlightenment theory. And I would go back, sure, the corporations do this, but this radical individualism started out of very left-leaning leftist thinkers. And one of the things it has done is consistently attack tribalism, to where we all recognize now that you could say, oh, tribalism, they just were Trump and his followers are tribal. And I mean, we all instinctively, it's like we all attack tribe now.
Right.
But at the same time, you say tribe to an individual and there's something inside that also calls people, right? But I think it's just it's a natural outgrowth of, the Enlightenment theory was I think an appropriate response to overly authoritarian community, and I think in certain ways we've played it. And I in this part of the book I wrote, I think I'm the perfect example. If the Enlightenment thinkers could come see me now, that I'm living out. I'm a radical. I'm here by myself, and you've been to my cabin up in the mountains, and I go and I spend weeks at a time up there sometimes writing on my own. I've been in community, but I've left it all. I've worked in politics. I've had that free speech that all the Enlightenment thinkers, most of them never had, right? And I was sitting, and I realized, like, I'm Enlightenment thinkers' wet dream in a certain way. I'm the individual who's been free and been able to express and do all these things in my life, but from this vantage point that they didn't have, there's problems with it.
Right. The isolation
and lack of community, lack of belonging. So I'm convinced that, and I don't mean this in some universal sense, because clearly every individual is different, and that's part of being a radical individual. Yeah, you're exactly the same. But I think we need being and belonging, is what I call it. Like, I think those are two parts of us that we yearn for.
Yeah. Are there examples of tribal? Because every time I think about the tribal identity and the tribal group and all that, there's the in-group and the out-group, right? So you're one of us, you're not one of them.
But let's talk about that, because, and let's talk about one of our favorite authors. I say that facetiously. Steven Pinker, right? If you read Better Angels of Our Nature, it's a complete attack on tribalism. And we've been taught, this is a thing that we've been taught since the Enlightenment. Tribes are going to fight. There's in-group and out-group. Well, Steven Pinker's next book is called Enlightenment Now, and he's touting all the Enlightenment theories and how great it is. But buried in that book, they did this study on post-Russia, the breakup, and all these ethnic groups that live near each other. And anyway, they did a study, and they came up with something like 95% of groups who had the potential to be violent to each other because they had such differing beliefs never had a problem. And and we've without,
so we just hear about Chechnya.
Without doing the noble savage thing, in a sense, I think many of us have come to understand that the Hobbesian view of early man just isn't right. And I now believe that I think it's the exception, not the rule, that groups are always going to fight.
Right.
That they're going to devolve. We love our families without hating someone else's family.
Right.
And I think that's more natural than the opposite, right?
Yeah. I agree. And it's interesting how strong and ubiquitous the propaganda promoting the opposite view is. And it makes me think, like, if you need to tell me the same lie every day, like,
right,
it must be pretty obvious that you're wrong. Otherwise, you'd be more relaxed about it.
Right.
Like even just calling it the Enlightenment. Like,
sure,
are you fucking kidding me?
No,
like,
it's all propaganda.
Yeah,
right?
the Enlightenment. Oh, so it was the Dark Ages, and then it was the Enlightenment. Oh,
but like you said about me and Mormonism, I think Western culture is so steeped in these ideals. Like, these ideals have so shaped us that it's the water we're swimming in that we don't even recognize it anymore.
No, I agree.
And so leftists in Seattle everything is anti-tribe, 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 blah, blah, blah. Except for the Indian tribes, of course, which are the only tribes that have ever existed. I think I told you once I've been canceled by some people because I use the word tribe, who think I'm appropriating the word tribe from Native Americans, as though all of our ancestors didn't grow like we're all from tribes, right? Anyway.
Yeah, I know, that's a funny thing. I also have been harassed for using the word tribe. It's like, what? And then I use the word Indian, and that really put them over the edge. And I had to say, like, first of all, you're a rich white lady. giving me shit for saying Indian.
Right.
I know Indians, and they're like, yeah, call us Indians. We don't give a shit.
Well, my high school ended up changing. We were the Indians in my high school, and they ended up changing the name.
To the First Nations?
The Eagles.
The Eagles. Yeah, I don't know.
After the rock band.
Oh, right. Not the bird. Don't offend any birds. Yeah. So what is this project? We've sort of hinted, it's sometimes you call it a book, sometimes you call it a project.
Because
the book is part of the project?
Well, the book is only a way to sort of introduce the project.
Does it have a name yet, or is it too early?
Well, it depends on which part of the project you're talking about.
No,
so,
okay.
as I jokingly said to you early on, I'm starting a cult, in a sense.
Me, and everyone else, man.
But the idea is I'm building a framework by which any group, with whatever values and beliefs they have, could plug those in to help them form a more committed group. So that's one side of it. The other side is I'm actually plugging in my values and belief systems to build what I hope becomes my own tribe at some point. And so the book is the whole project's essentially done, and the book is the last. It's weird because this is how far we've gotten away from these ideas of community and tribe. Like, you'll understand the words I'm using, but I can't, like, the way people's eyes gloss over when I talk about what used to be completely natural to humanity. And so the book is meant to one, look, everyone would agree that if I say the world is fucked up, everyone agrees. But what we're tending to do in the West now is we think that the answer to that is to go farther and farther down this road of hyper-individualism, to atomize ourselves more and more, that's the answer to everything we're doing. And I've really, I look at that now as a cultural virus that infects. I look at my friends back in Seattle, and some of what I now would, and not to minimize the importance of any of these, but the stupid, over contentious political fights, even with, it's divided as the country is left and right. Seattle is just as divided within its own issues in there. And I, everyone keeps thinking everyone has to go further and further down this road of individualism. And I've stepped away from that view that's one of the values of having been out of the U.S. for 5 years. Is it's sort of like when I left Mormonism. It took me, for 3 years I said I hadn't really left, I'm just getting a different vantage point so I can turn around and look at it and judge it. And I feel that way about the U.S. now. And that being back there last year for COVID, to be honest, made me not ever really want to be there again. A place like Seattle is beautiful. It's a beautiful city, and all this money, and I now see it as completely empty and void of real human warmth and caring. And I mean that on all sides, left and right, because everyone is sort of on this same, again, this is Enlightenment theory, and I feel like we've hit this vortex of, it's just accelerating from here on out. And I think it's like taking a fish out of water, and we keep looking for ways to prop that fish up, saying, we'll build him a suit that he can walk in on land, and we'll do this, but why don't you just put him back in water? And so the project is a way for me, because I believe that, there have been lots of communes and that have tried these things, but I think most of them have lacked rigorous understanding of the social tools that we used to take for granted that help build trust amongst the group. And the project is about doing that.
Yeah, talking about this demonization, and you mentioned communes, and a lot of people listening to this will say, fucking communes, they never work, that's all silly hippie bullshit. But I was reading a story in the New Yorker, and it was about the commune movement of the 19th century when they were springing up all over the place. And the author went back and looked at the history of communes in the United States and found how many had started and how quickly they ended. And some are still persisting to this day, right? The Amish, for example, started. Right. The Quakers, the Shakers, all these different, the Oneida Colony and so on. And what the author found, I don't remember if it was a man or a woman, but the point was that the rate of the failure rate of communes in the United States is roughly equivalent to the failure rate of new corporations in the United States.
Sure.
But nobody ever says, "Oh, startup companies, that never works."
Yeah.
"Oh, corporations, that's just silly businessman bullshit."
No,
It's like
absolutely.
it's the way things are framed is so pernicious and sneaky.
Well, it's with everything within our culture. I've come to start saying normal is a cult.
Yeah.
And most people don't get what because again, it's just, what? What are you talking about?
Immediately.
Normal is a cult.
Arbitrary
it's
nonsense.
from the vantage point at which you're judging everything else without looking back at your own viewpoint and how hard it is. People say, well, a cult's a place you can't leave. Try leaving Western culture.
Yeah.
And try doing that within Western culture, right? Living differently. Those are
right.
some hard rules to break.
Yeah. Can I just buy a piece of land and build a house and not pay property tax on it and not have to grow my own food and people just leave me alone? Nope.
Oh.
Nope. You can't do that.
I know.
Yeah. It's interesting. So, are there examples in this research that you're doing, or I should say, what are the best examples of groups that you consider to be successful and models for something that's admirable, that isn't us against them kind of mentality?
It's funny. In fact, I've got this chapter slated out to write about this. Again, I give all the props in the world to the early communes and other communes. One, I do take issue with them all generally trying to be agrarian, in the fact that, in my view and lots of people's views, agrarianism is sort of what accelerated our split into individualism. But I digress. Ironically, you know who I think of? Because I actually don't think that I just don't think these communities exist anymore. I joined a co-housing group in Seattle, my first wife and I, and a co-housing group to build a 24-unit condo thing together. And we were part of this for 2 years. We invested. And for 2 years, we tried to work through committees. Everything had to be consensus. Everything. The color of the paint on the walls. We had to reach 100% consensus in order to move forward. And after 2 years, that just burned us out. It was just completely untenable. But, they eventually got built, and they painted them beige. It was the joke. They ended up painting them beige. They literally did. So I just don't think we have these models. And I don't think we know how to do it.
Right.
But there's two examples I come back to that I think are partway down that road. Weight Watchers and Alcoholics Anonymous. Let's take Alcoholics Anonymous, right? You come in and you have to accept some core beliefs and you have to follow certain values and certain rituals and lean on each other. To me, there's a way in which it shows the power of what groups can do. And so if you took those same ideas, similar ideas, for whatever issue it is you want to build in your life, I think they're not exactly what I would say because they're so narrowly focused, but those are two examples that I think capture a little bit of what it means to be in committed community.
So you can be in several different groups at the same time, right? You can be in a group that's focused, you can be in AA, and you can also be in a community group and a family group and all that. Where does family fit into this tribalism that you're looking at?
Well, so in my model, in what I'm building, for example, I say nothing about romantic relationships. In fact, and of course this is an issue that we talk about a lot, I personally believe we have to decouple our sense of community from passion and romance.
Pun intended.
Exactly. I just think it's the most, I guess this is a good example. I think monogamy probably worked better in a context of large, supportive, extended family. You were just
Right.
You were just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Right.
But the more we've whittled that away, and you now have to rely on everything out of this one bond that was generally in our culture built on passion and romance. I just think it's a ridiculous thing to do. And also, we haven't talked much about story because story becomes a big part of the tribe, but Netflix has this new feature called Play Something. If you were to go on Netflix and just shuffle and play something, they're going to show you a show, and that show is going to tell you all the ways in which we're fucked up right now. We're telling each other the stories about it not working. Like most of our stories are about divorced families and split up families and affairs and ways things don't work. Like our stories are telling us exactly, I think, what's wrong, but we've gotten to a point where I say we consume our stories like junk food. They're just, they're like the Doritos or whatever.
But isn't that just the requirements of drama? Shakespeare wasn't writing about happy, relaxed families.
No, but this is the point, is Shakespeare had a moral viewpoint. He was writing, like he would write a story with an idea of a moral that he wanted to tell. And now, I think, as most of our stories are written from a corporate shareholder's viewpoint. And I think they're exploiting human emotion. Like they're tapping into human emotion. The movie Love Actually, right? Like I think our desire to be part of a community is so strong, and the only thing we have left to do that is monogamous marriage. And corporations are exploiting that desire, like to sell movies now, right? I mean, and it's the feedback loop that's teaching us, well, this is what a marriage is supposed to be, and it should be perfect like this, or even a divorce. This is the way a divorce should be, and the way we should hate each other, and the way we should fight with lawyers. But it doesn't start in the way Shakespeare started. Like, I think generally stories are getting written, and the stories we're consuming right now are written to shareholders, for shareholders' needs, by exploiting human needs and selling stories that humans will like. And they're going to test that movie, and if it doesn't, they're not going to release it, right? They're going to see how it, and I just think the way story is being used now, and still I would say it's ironic, because I do think it's parroting back to us the problems that exist.
It's interesting when there's a crack in that wall that you're talking about, that connection between the story that's being presented and the corporate interests that are behind it. You just watched the Chappelle thing the other night, and everybody's pointing out that on Rotten Tomatoes the critic score is 43 and the popular score is 98 or something.
Sure.
And so it's like, obviously, the elites, artsy-fartsy, intellectual, woke critics are looking at that and saying this guy's, Cro-Magnon, ignorant, transphobic, etc. But everybody else is looking at it and saying, no, that was funny. He's a comedian, and that was funny, and that didn't seem mean to me. I don't get it. I wonder if that's like a glimmer of hope.
So it's funny you bring that up, and I'll give you a correlation back to my political work. The left likes to talk about the people. We're working for the people, and you can do all sorts of polls. Like, say you want to run a political campaign, I can do a poll and ask all the people what their opinion is of an issue, and a lot of people will have strong opinions, but that's very different than the people who are actually going to turn out on election day and cast that vote. Right. So you can come into it and say, oh, look, this candidate has 78% support for this idea and that idea, blah.
Sure.
And then you run the campaign.
Right.
And then it comes down to who votes. Right. So maybe there's a glimmer of hope there, but you also might find that the corporations are better tapped into who's actually going to spend money. Who's actually going to, who can we reach?
Well, Netflix seems to believe, I mean, they're making a lot of money on that special. So in this particular case, the corporation agrees with the public.
Yeah, and look, for example, I don't think Netflix is full of evil people who are. In fact, I think part of the problem is that they almost have no agenda at all, and except for making money, right?
Yeah.
And of course, you could say that's what's more democratic than that, right? Providing the viewers with exactly what they want, right? The problem is we live in an age now where through psychoanalysis and data, like, these corporations know us better than we know ourselves now. And I mean that literally, because most humans don't have a real sense of the biological drives in their DNA and like, the things that really shape them. Like, most humans don't get why I did X, Y, or Z. Mm-hmm. The corporations know now.
Right.
Like, that's, starting with the advent, the end of Mad Men, right? When,
right.
But from there, it's gotten ridiculous.
I would trace it back much earlier to the 1920s. Edward Bernays, who was the father of modern advertising,
sure,
and Sigmund Freud's nephew.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think we've crossed this threshold, though, where the amount of money that Facebook spends on keeping your eyeballs on a certain thing, like, this has been ridiculous for me my whole life, and we don't talk about it, that there are adults sitting in cubicles trying to figure out how to hook my kids on something.
Right.
Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, and I bet you these adults have kids of their own, right? In fact, in my book,
a lot of those adults, those engineers, don't let their kids use Instagram.
In my book, I write this story about my grandparents and the simpler time and the simple way they lived in Idaho. And he was a volunteer fireman, and we'd go visit, and then we'd do this whole caravan with all the extended family, and we'd like boondock out by some river, and we'd fish. Fishing was their passion. But because he was a fireman, he taught all of his grandkids, like, all day long there would be stories. And I say in the book, this gets back to the earlier point, that all the stories, even then, had a purpose. Like, they all drove us to a better understanding of ourselves and of our family and the family history and what drew us together. But he would tell us the story of Smokey the Bear, right? And Smokey the Bear this, and he was teaching us fire safety and we would build these big bonfires at night, and he would let us all light a part of it. And I write in the book, imagine if he was a representative of a corporation selling Smokey the Bear teddy bears. How different the way he told that story to us would be. Like, if his benefit from that story, the takeaway was that he got to sell more Smokey the Bear teddy bears. Like, that would fundamentally and radically change that whole interaction.
Yeah.
And I think that's essentially where we're at. I can talk about doom and gloom like this, but in a certain way, I don't necessarily condemn it all. I think this hyper-individualism that we're experiencing, and part of this is, I think, the consumerist, explosion of individualist taste and blah. In some ways, I think it was necessary and good and probably unavoidable given the trajectory we've been on. And so the question now is, and I don't know the answer to this, and this is central to my project. So belonging to community prior to now was what I call a given. You had to, either for family reasons, for political reasons, or because you believed in a God who would kill you and send you to hell if you didn't. We're now at a point at which we have to choose to do that, and that's a much weaker motivation to be able to form these communities.
It's weaker, but it increases the chance that the community is going to actually be responsive to your needs, right? Because they don't have a captive audience.
Sure, and that's so part of my project. What I say is the community should give 50% of your life to the community and 50% of your life to yourself, and that the two can't exist apart. And the motto for the whole project says, "I am your foundation, you are my extension." And that's, I think, the part that old community misses, valuing the extension of the ideas that can be filtered into that group by sending those individuals out empowering them as themselves to find new things to come in and renew the community.
Right.
And I think that's why religion's dying. Like it's going to last for another 1,000 years, but the old model religions don't do that.
Right.
Like Mormonism had no way for me to bring my own ideas into it.
Right.
And how crazy is that? You're sending 75,000 kids out into the world.
Right. But you're not interested
and
in
not
hearing
listening
what they learn.
to anything that they learn.
Yeah.
But on the corollary, those 75,000 kids are not listening to anything that somebody there could teach them. I mean, imagine the arrogance of me as a 19-year-old going to a Baptist minister in Puerto Rico, which I did, telling him what's what. But Mormons got 75,000 of those kids out in the world doing that.
Yeah.
So
that's funny. Timo, we got to do more of these, man. Your project sounds like something that will never be finished, but when you reach a point where you've got a book to sell or something.
There's a little bit, if anyone's interested, I have a website called storyofexistence.com. That won't make any sense to anyone who goes there because it's sort of in pieces still.
Great sales pitch there, buddy.
But it's a way to, if you're interested, reach out.
What's it called? Secret of Existence?
Existence.
Storyofexistence.com. All right. Thanks, buddy.
You bet.
Let's go have some dinner.
All right. Sounds good to me.
Hope you enjoyed that conversation with my boy Timo. I sure did. Don't forget to check out omgyes.com/Chris Ryan. Get 10% off all your sexual curiosity needs. Excellent for anybody who is interested in women's sexual pleasure, whether you're a woman looking to maximize your own or someone else's, or a dude looking to maximize a woman's sexual pleasure, whatever you are, wherever you're coming from, if that's where you're trying to go. And hey, who doesn't want to maximize women's sexual pleasure? Come on now. This is one of the great natural resources available to human beings. Let's maximize it. All right. omgyes.com/Chris Ryan for 10% off. Thanks, everybody. Hope you're having a beautiful end of 2021 or beginning of 2022. Whenever you're listening to this, wherever you are, I hope things are going well for you and you're riding out the storm. All right. Catch you next time. All right. So apparently I haven't been pushing the shirts and signed books and stuff enough recently because my mom said orders are falling off. So here we are. Mom, tell people what's available for this special holiday season.
Well, we of course have lots of Civilized to Death shirts in all sizes, and still quite a few Sex at Dawn shirts in all sizes. Now, some sizes are limited in the other categories, but I'm sure we can find something that would fit you.
And what else do they have? Are there books? There's the Tangentially Reading book.
Yes, we have the Sex at Dawn book signed by the author himself. We have Civilized to Death books signed by the author.
And will you sign the books as well, Mom, for a low price?
Oh, sure. I'll write anything.
All right.
As Chris once told our daughter when she tried to forge a letter to her school, you should have had Mom do that. She'll write anything. We also have beer koozies or cozies or whatever.
Right.
And we have stickers and decals.
So get those orders in. Give Mom something to do. Give her a reason to go talk to the ladies at the post office.